Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to explore this really deeply reflective personal gardening log.
Yeah, from May 24, 2026.
Exactly. By an author named Ang. And the post is titled The First Sesame Harvest, a Life Cycle Completion.
Right. It's such a great title.
It is. And we're really looking at a very specific snapshot in time today. It's labeled Notes on Gardening, Part 904.
Wow.
Yeah, where Ang basically discovers these tiny black sesame seeds, Sesamum indicum, while just doing their daily watering.
Which is such a mundane chore, but it leads to this huge realization.
Totally. But before we, really get into the dirt here, I want you, the listener, to think about a very specific feeling for a second.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Right. Have you ever decided to make something completely from scratch, just for fun? Say you decide to bake a loaf of artisanal sourdough bread.
The classic pandemic hobby.
Exactly, the classic.
Yeah.
So you spend days lovingly feeding a starter, you get flour literally all over your kitchen, you agonize over the ambient temperature, you wait hours and hours for the proofing.
It's a whole ordeal.
It's a massive ordeal. And when that one single loaf comes out of the oven, it feels like this, this monumental triumph of human will.
Yeah, you hold that warm bread,
Yeah.
and you feel this genuine sense of self-sufficiency. Like it's a temporary illusion that you have somehow mastered the physical world.
Yes, exactly. And then the very next day, you walk into just an ordinary supermarket. You turn a corner and you see an entire aisle filled with hundreds, maybe, thousands of loaves of bread.
All perfectly uniform.
Right, all wrapped in plastic, just sitting there for a few dollars. And suddenly, the math of how the world actually works just completely breaks your brain.
It really does. The invisible scale of mass production becomes so incredibly disorienting once you've actually tried to do the work with your own two hands.
And that's exactly what's happening here. Okay, let's unpack this, because the scale of the commitment in Ang's log is what initially caught my eye.
The Part 904 thing.
Yes, the log is literally labeled Part 904. Think about the sheer dedication required to reach Part 904 of any endeavor.
It's staggering.
It really is. Like, if you are keeping a journal and you are on entry 904, that implies, a massive amount of consistency. You have shown up, observed, and recorded your thoughts 903 times before this particular day.
Yeah, it feels less like a casual hobby and almost more like a scientist watching a time-lapse video just frame by frame.
Exactly. It's like a marathon runner tracking every single footstep. You aren't just waiting for the end result, you are logging the microscopic changes of the process itself.
And what's fascinating here is that level of observation forces a fundamental shift in how you perceive time.
How do you mean?
Well, we are entirely conditioned to live by mechanical time, right? Hours, minutes, fiscal quarters, 2-day shipping deadlines.
Oh, for sure. The Amazon Prime mindset.
Exactly. Mechanical time was literally invented to coordinate train schedules and factory shifts. But a garden is completely indifferent to your calendar.
Right. The plants do not care about your deadlines.
They don't. And the source material specifically notes that these sesame seeds were sown, quote, some moons ago.
I love that phrasing, some moons ago.
Yeah, by using the phrase some moons ago, Ang is explicitly surrendering to the biological timeline. The author isn't tapping their watch.
Right.
They are letting the orbital mechanics of the moon dictate the pacing of their project.
Which is such a stark contrast to a world that's just obsessed with instant gratification. In a world like that, what does it say about the author that they track progress in moons and just wait patiently to see a plant complete its cycle?
I think it says that the satisfaction being derived here has absolutely nothing to do with the acquisition of a product.
It's not about getting the seeds immediately.
Right. Sowing the seed, watching for the bloom, observing the really slow development of the pods. The journey itself is the reward.
Ang has basically aligned their personal sense of pacing with the natural world.
Exactly, that rhythmic, unhurried biology.
But see, here's where it gets really interesting, because there's an inherent tension in that kind of active patience, right?
Oh, definitely.
Eventually, the biological clock just runs out, the plant stops growing, and you are left with the physical harvest. And in Ang's case, that harvest totally shatters the illusion of effort equaling reward.
Because of the yield.
Right, look at the math here. You spend months, like multiple lunar cycles, waiting on this plant. And Ang explicitly admits in the log that the final yield, quote, isn't exactly plentiful.
Yeah, it's a very low yield.
Right, and if I spent say 6 months, building a highly complex, liquid-cooled custom computer from scratch, only to turn it on and realize it can only run a simple calculator app, I'd be furious.
You consider it a massive failure.
A huge failure. I'd be incredibly frustrated. Yet, Aang calls this a massive success. Why isn't Aang frustrated by what is objectively a terrible return on investment?
Well, to understand that lack of frustration, we have to look at the psychological phenomenon known as the IKEA effect.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah, combined with a purely biological definition of success. So the IKEA effect is this cognitive bias where we place a disproportionately high value on things we partially create ourselves.
Right, so like a wobbly chair you built with an Allen wrench feels way more valuable to you than a flawless chair you just bought pre-assembled.
Precisely. Aang is basically experiencing the agricultural version of this. The labor that's infused into those few little seeds imbues them with a value that goes far beyond their caloric or monetary worth.
So the low yield doesn't even matter because the subjective value of each individual seed is astronomically high to the person who actually grew it.
Exactly. And furthermore, Aang is just rejecting the metric of industrial capitalism entirely here.
How so?
Well, if the goal is maximum output for minimum time invested, this garden is a disaster, right?
Total disaster.
But success here is measured by biological completion. The victory is just that the plant survived, it thrived, and it did what it was genetically programmed to do.
That is such a wild shift in perspective.
It is. And the most crucial detail in the log is what Aang plans to do next. They are immediately ready to start the process all over again by reseeding.
Which is so interesting because that turns a tiny yield into an infinite loop. The seeds aren't a final product to be consumed. They are the literal mechanism for continuing the game.
Right.
In the text, Aang mentions that alongside basil, sesame is their main focus in the garden. And they make this wonderful admission stating they've been planting them, quote, season after season, mostly just for the fun of it.
Just for the fun of it. That's
Right.
the key.
Eagerly anticipating the next round of germination. It makes me think of playing a deeply complex video game on New Game Plus,
Yeah.
or rereading a favorite novel for the 5th time.
You already know the ending.
Exactly. Aang knows what a tiny black sesame seed looks like. There is no surprise plot twist waiting at the end of the season.
But you engage in the repetition because the mechanics of getting there trigger a state of flow. The daily watering, the pruning, the tactile sensation of the dirt.
Right.
Psychologists refer to this as an autotelic activity.
Autotelic, what does that mean?
It means the activity is its own reward. When you do something extrinsically, you do it for a payoff, like a paycheck or a good grade or a full pantry to literally survive the winter.
Okay, I see.
But intrinsic motivation means you aren't farming to survive. You are gardening to connect with the living world. The joy of observing germination, of seeing life emerge from dormant soil, it's endlessly renewing.
Okay, so that intimate, intrinsically motivated bubble is beautiful, but it eventually has to pop, right? Because Aang doesn't just look at the plants. Aang actually opens up the sesame pods to get the seeds out.
And here is where reality sets in.
Yeah. This is where the micro scale of a personal hobby violently collides with the macro scale of global agriculture. Aang makes this critical mathematical observation that changes the entire tone of the log.
The 10-seed thing.
Yes. Each pod only holds about 10 seeds. 10.
It is the ultimate moment of mechanical truth.
It's mind-blowing. So what does this all mean? Let's visualize this for you, the listener, so you can really feel the weight of what Aang is experiencing here.
Think about the scale.
Exactly. Think about an ordinary sesame seed bun at your local burger place. Just the top of that bun alone holds easily 200, maybe 300 seeds.
At least.
At 10 seeds a pod, you are looking at dozens and dozens of individual pods that had to be grown. Dozens of pods that had to go through this entire moons-long biological cycle, requiring water, sunlight, perfect soil chemistry.
That's for the garnish?
Just for the garnish on the top of one single sandwich.
Yeah.
A sandwich that someone is going to eat in like 5 minutes and completely forget about. It makes you realize how deeply disconnected we are from where our stuff actually comes from.
It really does. But this raises an important question, because that disconnect is entirely by design.
By design, how do you mean?
Think about the illusion of the grocery store shelf. Products are presented to you as static, finished objects.
Right, like they just magically appeared there.
Exactly. A plastic shaker of sesame seeds for $3.99 is entirely divorced from its origin. It completely erases the months of rainfall and human labor.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But Aang's hands-on struggle to extract just a few tiny seeds manually? That shatters that illusion. It reveals the staggering biological logistics of commercial agriculture that the rest of us just take completely for granted.
So does completing a microtask like this make us appreciate the macro world more, or does it just highlight how ignorant we are?
Probably a bit of both. And
Okay.
to really understand why Aang is so overwhelmed, we have to look at the actual mechanism of how sesame grows,
Right.
because it is notoriously one of the most difficult crops in human history to harvest.
Difficult how? Because, like, to a layperson, it's just a tiny seed in a pod. You just crack it open and shake it out, right?
You'd think so. But the difficulty comes from a biological trait called dehiscence, which is more commonly known as shattering. Yes, sesame is one of the oldest domesticated oilseed crops, dating back thousands of years to the Indus Valley. But for most of human history, it had this massive evolutionary defense mechanism.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What did it do?
When a sesame pod ripens and dries out, it doesn't just gently open, it shatters. It violently bursts open to scatter its seeds as far as possible to ensure the next generation survives.
Wait, it literally
It
explodes.
literally bursts open.
Which is great for the plant's survival, obviously, but an absolute nightmare if you were a farmer trying to collect those seeds.
Exactly.
Because if you wait until they are fully ripe, the plant just throws your entire harvest onto the ground.
Precisely. So for millennia, the only way to harvest sesame was through backbreaking manual labor.
Oh, man.
Farmers had to harvest the plants by hand just before they were fully ripe, bundle them together, and stack them upright in shocks so they could dry slowly.
That sounds incredibly tedious.
It gets worse. Then workers had to manually shake the drying plants over a cloth to catch the seeds as the pods finally shattered. It was incredibly labor-intensive.
Wow.
So when Aang writes that collecting a full pack is, quote, quite a task, they're experiencing the exact same manual bottleneck that humanity struggled with for over 4,000 years.
That is insane. So how do commercial farms do it today? If Aang is struggling with just a few pods in the backyard, how do we have enough to cover millions of hamburger buns and fill massive bottles of sesame oil without, an army of millions of people shaking plants over blankets?
Science, basically.
Yeah.
The solution didn't come until 1943.
Oh, that recent.
Yeah, relatively recent. An agricultural researcher named D.G. Langham discovered a natural genetic mutation in a sesame plant that was indehiscent.
Indehiscent, meaning it didn't shatter.
Exactly, meaning the pods stayed closed even when they were fully ripe.
Oh, wow.
It took decades of further selective breeding to develop modern, commercial varieties that wouldn't shatter, which finally allowed farmers to use massive, mechanized combine harvesters to separate the seeds from the stalks directly in the field.
That completely reframes Aang's entire epiphany for me. It isn't just about the volume of pods. Aang is sitting in a garden, manually prying open pods for 10 seeds at a time, completely unaware that the only reason those jars in the supermarket even exist is because of a century of intense genetic science
Yes.
and massive industrial machinery designed specifically to defeat the plant's natural desire to just explode.
The hands-on experience bridges the gap between the micro effort of the individual and the macro scale of global food production.
It's like the scales just fall from your eyes.
Exactly. You can no longer look at the commodity without seeing the process.
Yeah.
And that is the true value of Aang's 904th gardening note.
Right.
It isn't really about the sesame seeds at all. It's about how the act of growing them completely altered Aang's perception of reality. It turned a completely mundane pantry staple into a marvel of coordinated human effort, historical struggle, and biological scale.
It really is the same realization people have when they try to, knit their own sweater for the first time.
Oh, for sure.
You spend 80 hours carefully looping yarn, your hands are cramping, and then you walk into a fast fashion store and see a knit sweater for $15.
And your brain just short circuits.
You just freeze. Because once you understand the actual mechanism of the labor, the price tag makes 0 sense. You suddenly realize the vast, invisible, globe-spanning machine that has to exist to make that $15 sweater or that $3 jar of seeds even possible.
Because hobbies don't just pass the time. They recalibrate our understanding of value.
That's a great way to put it.
They force us out of the role of passive consumers and turn us back into active participants in the physical world.
Which really brings us to a fascinating conclusion for our journey today.
It's been quite the ride.
It has. We started with the quiet, patient dedication of logging 904 gardening notes by the light of the moon. We explored the psychology of celebrating a tiny yield just because the biological cycle was completed.
Right, the IKEA effect in the garden.
Exactly. And we finally arrived at the staggering mechanized reality of just how hard it is to produce the tiny black seeds the rest of us casually sprinkle on our food.
It's basically an invitation to look closer at the ordinary objects surrounding us.
Absolutely. So, to you, the listener, I really want you to think about this in your own life. Think about the things you do, as Ang says, season after season, mostly just for the fun of it.
Yeah, whatever that is for you.
Right. It could be gardening, it could be coding, it could be woodworking or painting. When you strip away the pressure to produce a massive yield, when you stop worrying about the mechanical efficiency of your output and tap into that intrinsic motivation, how does focusing purely on the process change your relationship with the outcome?
That's the real takeaway. And take that reflection one step further into the macro world.
Oh, definitely.
If it takes months of waiting, observing, blooming, and pod developing just to yield a tiny handful of seeds at 10 per pod, consider the sheer unimaginable acreage of plants that had to perfectly complete their life cycles just to fill the small bottle of sesame oil sitting in your kitchen right now.
It's mind-boggling.
Think about the thousands of gallons of water, the centuries of agricultural science, the massive mechanized combines rolling over vast stretches of land. What other massive invisible efforts are hiding in plain sight in your pantry, masquerading as simple, everyday ingredients?